All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning to all of you joining us from near and far. Welcome to the 2021 ICAP Status Report webinar. My name is Emma Krause. I'm an advisor at the International Carbon Action Partnership and am thrilled to have a really interesting and engaging panel with us today to present the latest status report from the Secretariat. We're really looking forward to the conversation and thrilled to have so many notable ETS policymakers with us to dive into the report with all of you. Before we dig into the discussion, we'd like to get a sense of who's with us today. So we're going to launch a quick Mentimeter poll to see who is joining us and where you are joining us from. So on your screen, you should see a pop-up telling you to go to menti.com and use a code. There we are. Go to menti.com and please pop that code in the code box. Shortly following that, a map will pop up on your screen, and we'd love for you to click on where in the world you are located so that we can have a sense of where everybody's calling in from today. Right, so far, we've only got Europeans on the line, but I don't think that's only the case. Okay, a fellow North American coming in, very nice. There we are. Okay, so quite a bit of diversity here. Lots of Europeans, North Americans on the line, and also South America. So welcome and happy to have everyone here with us today. I'd like to go to the next question now that we'd ask you. We'd like to get a sense of what the state of ETS is in the country in which you reside. Again, this can be done menti.com using the code and giving us your answer. We're having a question from the floor. If a subnational counts, absolutely. Okay, we've got quite a few folks with us today coming in from a jurisdiction with an ETS in force. Great to see, and looking forward to digging into some of those ETSs today with our panelists. So without further ado, I think it's time we get started. We're going to start with my colleague, William Ackworth from the ICAP Secretariat. He's the head of the Secretariat. He'll give a quick overview of the 2021 ICAP status report. He'll be followed by updates from some key ETS policymakers, including Julia Siemens from the European Commission, Alex Hanke from Germany, Brittany White from Nova Scotia, and Germán Romero Otalera from Colombia. So with that, I'll give a brief introduction of my colleague, William. As I said, he's the head of the Secretariat at ICAP, where he works closely with a network of almost 40 governments and agencies to exchange experiences and know-how on establishing and designing emissions trading systems. He leads technical work programs on issues spanning carbon leakage and competitiveness, integrating carbon pricing into electricity sector transitions, and sectoral expansion of emissions trading systems. He has also designed and implemented ICAP's capacity building programs in regions including Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So with that, the floor is yours, William. Looking forward to hearing more about the report.
Emma, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also welcome everybody to the launch of ICAP's status report. So for anyone that's joining us for the first time, ICAP, or the International Carbon Action Partnership, is a partnership for jurisdictions that have implemented or are taking serious steps to implement mandatory cap and trade systems. The launch of the status report is always a special moment for us. It's our flagship report, and I wanted to take the opportunity to thank the whole team at the ICAP Secretariat for the really immense amount of work that goes on to put this publication together, particularly over the sort of winter break here in Europe. At the same time, many thanks to all of our members, those that are with us on the panel today, also those in the audience and those that are not, for providing us with the information, helping us make sure that all the facts are correct, and basically also feeding into this report. We certainly could not do it without your contributions, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you. So a lot has changed over the last year, but one thing is for sure, that I think we're a lot more comfortable at doing these online sessions than we were this time last year when the stats report launched. So I encourage everybody to take the opportunity to sort of engage and ask questions. And if there's anything that you would like to follow up with the Secretariat after the webinar, then don't hesitate to get in touch. So Jana, please, next slide. So here we have it. This is sort of one of the infographics from the ICAP status report that's perhaps shared and used some of the most over the year. And as you can see here, really it's very active in what's going on in terms of the global development of emission trading systems. So as of 2021, we have now 24 emission trading systems operating globally. And I think just what I wanted to point out initially from this slide is really how the diversity of those systems that are actually now under consideration or under development, and sort of provide us with a window into what emission trading system development may look like in the future, and where these markets, I guess, are becoming most active. And you can see here that there's been a lot of policy developments taking place in Asia. So many of you may have been following the developments that have taken place in Indonesia and Vietnam, but these are two jurisdictions that are readying the policy developments and regulations domestically to launch carbon markets in the coming years. And so these are regions that we're watching carefully and working with as ICAP and the ICAP Secretariat, as I think this can potentially really show strong leadership for the region and join other systems such as the Korean emissions trading system, as well as the newly launched Chinese emissions trading system, which I will speak to in a moment. Another one, I guess, there to keep an eye on is renewed interest in emission trading systems from Japan, as the country, I guess, renews interest in carbon pricing and what role it might play as they're confronted with their net zero target. In North America, we also have seen some very interesting developments this year, and particularly just this month, we saw the launch of the model rule for the Transportation Climate Initiative. So this is an emissions trading system that aims to cap emissions from the transportation sector. We have 4 states that have signed on to the model rule, but we know that there's been many other states that are involved in the discussions, particularly those that are also participating in the regional greenhouse gas initiative. And so it'll be really interesting to watch how these discussions and developments take place over the coming years until the launch of that system in 2023. And also in South America, we've seen, also in North America, the completion of the first pilot year of the Mexican emissions trading system, which is gathering really important experience, data, and intelligence to ready that market for the mandatory phase that's coming up. Next slide, please, Jana. But yes, so this is also a graph that we've been producing for a number of years. And here you can really see the vastly significant impact that China has had on global coverage. So we know that the Chinese national system has launched at the beginning of this year, covering about 4 billion tons. And this has effectively doubled emissions coverage by emission trading systems with the single system. So that's just a testament to how large this system actually is. I guess that as exciting as it is, I think with all policies, we need to be a little bit tempered in our expectations initially. It will be a soft start that focuses on the power sector, but it provides a framework for the system to actually develop, to bring in new sectors, and to make the system more stringent over time, such that it can become an effective part of China's transition to a net zero economy by 2060. So it's really exciting to see the system launched, and we're looking forward to watching how these developments take place over the coming years. Next slide, please, Jana. Okay, but there's been a lot of interest in allowance prices over the last year, and it really has been somewhat of a roller coaster ride. I think back this time last year, we saw all of the markets respond to the containment measures that were put in place to stop the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think, as we said at this time last year, a natural response for these markets would be for to have a decline in price as we have declines in future expectations around demand. But what was really interesting to watch over the course of the year is how the prices have actually stabilized and then recovered, such that the vast majority of markets actually finished the year with prices that are higher than those that were where they started at the beginning of 2020. And I think very importantly, this points to the fact that we have that these markets have developed with internal stabilization mechanisms, such as allowance price floors, such as the market stability mechanism, that actually can respond to exogenous shocks in a way that is predictable and continues to provide confidence to the market. I think this, combined with the fact that we've had such a focus also on the net zero transition, and that many of these emission trading systems are embedded within credible long-term frameworks with long-term commitments as well as 2030 targets, I think that the future price expectations or at least the future expectation of scarcity is there, and therefore the markets have sort of returned to fundamentals despite the really quite immense shock that we did see in 2020. So this has been, I guess, very encouraging to watch, and also provides confidence in these emission trading systems as an effective tool to actually contribute to greenhouse gas mitigation. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is by means of a bit of a summary, we can see that the emission trading systems are expanding. They're expanding in all regions around the world, which shows that the tool is flexible. It can be designed and built fit for purpose for the domestic conditions. They can be aligned to ambitious domestic targets, and with mechanisms inbuilt to actually respond to exogenous shocks, can actually provide a really resilient policy that can assist setting a price signal and encouraging the transition to a net zero economy. And I think I will leave it there. So Emma, back to you.
Thanks so much, Will, for the brief introduction, for all of the images that you saw there, and to dive deeper into the themes that Will highlighted. Please do take a look at the report, which can be found on the ICAP website. I'd now like to turn over to our panelists and begin with Yulia Zeman from the European Commission. Yulia is a policy officer at the Directorate General for Climate Action of the European Commission. She works in the EU ETS Policy Development and Auction Unit, dealing with specific aspects of system implementation and coordination with other EU policies, including on economic recovery and just transition. With ICAP, she supports us with implementing capacity building activities on emissions trading, which is funded by the European Commission. She holds a master's degree in carbon management from the University of Edinburgh. Yulia, we would be very keen to hear about updates from the EU ETS, so I will turn the floor over to you.
Many thanks, Emma. Let me quickly share my screen for you. Right. Thank you very much, Emma, for the introduction, and also to the whole ICAP team and Will's team for your hard work on this. I think especially on liaising with jurisdictions to make sure that that the reflections are high quality and accurate. This is very much welcome, since these the reports like this one are increasingly becoming reference points for our stakeholders and citizens. So it is very much welcome to see such high quality reports put out there. We of course also welcome all the developments in the emissions trading sphere. It's good to have more partners in this with us. Following the slightly retrospective but also forward-looking perspective of the report, I think when you consider the EU emissions trading system, so still maybe by a stretch, but still the largest and the longest lasting emissions trading system in the world, you have to look at the last 3 years through almost three lenses. One is the reform of the EU ETS that was completed in 2018. The other one is, of course, the pandemic and the economic crisis that it prompted. And the third one is, climate policy developments that have been ongoing and that have, in fact, picked up in the last year. So starting with 2019, we saw then the latest, so the most recent reform of the EU ETS in full effect. We've seen the carbon price signal strengthened and considered more credible by stakeholders. We've seen emissions become lower, mainly due to fantastic effort from the power sector. And of course, we've seen higher carbon price translate into much higher auction revenues that have been largely reinvested in further climate and energy purposes. What you might have already seen in the media is some prognosis on what those numbers would look like in 2020. I personally cannot speak to this just yet because the compliance cycle for the EU ETS ends next week. But I think that you may have seen prognosis for around 13% reduction in emissions. We'll see how correct those prognoses are later this year when the Commission does its internal reporting on the EU carbon market. But moving on to the second lens is of course the effect of the pandemic, which as Will has already pointed out, we have clearly seen in the price developments. But there, I think we've also as Will has already mentioned, seen a very robust recovery of the carbon market, mainly due to the factors of the first and third lens, so to speak. So first lens, the reinforced framework for the EU ETS, market stability reserve reinforced and confidently instilling confidence in stakeholders, as well as on the other hand, long-term commitment to climate action, including through our recovery agenda. Moving on to the third lens, a more forward-looking one. As mentioned, 2020 has seen some important developments in EU climate policy. Two of those being the European Climate Law, so the proposal to enshrine the target of EU climate neutrality by 2050 in law, and a proposal to increase our emissions reductions target in the interim to at least 55% by 2030 relative to 1990 levels. Of course, those two developments have important implications on the EU ETS, a cornerstone of our climate policy. This includes strengthening the EU ETS in line with those targets. You may have also heard about the proposal to extend the scope of emissions trading, reinforce the support for low carbon investment, as well as refine protection measures against the risk of carbon leakage. And there, of course, the buzzword is carbon border adjustment mechanism. Ultimately, however, as much as we are looking forward and getting ready to propose a revision of the EU ETS, another one in just after 3 years after we finished the last one, we are also maintaining the system as we have it right now. And again, in the last 3 years, we have gone through a huge amount of work to prepare the ongoing phase 4. We have operationalized the link with the Swiss ETS, launched 2 calls for projects under the Innovation Fund, and there we have seen, I think for one of those calls, we have seen 10 times the interest, and for the other one, almost 20 times the interest, which only shows the untapped capacity in low carbon innovation. We have also made some important important steps towards revising the ETS cap in view of UK's withdrawal from the EU, as well as most recently adopted a benchmark update to determine levels of free allocation in the first half of phase 4. So as you can see, a dynamic situation. I think it is fairly likely that in the next ICAP status report, we will be reflecting on an equally complex situation. But hopefully exciting and hopefully promising. I think that the EU ETS remains an important tool to deliver on EU climate ambition. Not the only one. I think we, in the process of proposing those more ambitious targets, we have also looked very closely at all the complementary policies, as well as resources that can support resources from emissions trading in driving further emissions reductions, but also in stimulating recovery from the ongoing crisis. So let's see what another year brings. This last 2 years have been definitely very eventful, and hopefully there's some positive developments ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Yulia. I wanted to pose a quick follow-up question. Given the increased climate targets for the EU that you highlighted, can you give us a sense of how these will be translated into the review process of the EU ETS that's forthcoming?
Yes, well, yes and no. So the legal proposals for how we will operationalize this increased ambition for 2030 will come in June. So in June, we are due to put forward proposals in this regard. As it is right now, our emissions reductions target are split between the ETS sectors, that is power, industry, and inter-EEA aviation, and non-ETS sectors. So where this line between where this split line will actually fall is being considered in the impact assessment. Of course, we proposed to extend the scope of emissions trading to new sectors, buildings, transport, and maritime, and how exactly that will be done again will be taken up in this June proposal. I think ultimately, we have 15 years of experience of running an ETS. We definitely have learned the importance of robust monitoring, reporting and verification system, and I think when considering an extension, one can imagine that some sort of transitionary pilot phase might be better fit to actually extend the emissions, the scope of emissions trading as such. But as I said, all the details should follow. So watch this space.
I think it's safe to say we will be, with quite a few others, and looking forward to see what's coming. For all those out there with eager questions, I'm seeing them getting going in the Q&A. That's great. Please feel free to post any questions you may have. Please also give us your name and affiliation, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the discussion. With that, I'm going to turn next to Alexander Hanke. He will be giving us an update on the German national ETS. Alexander is a senior policy officer for bilateral and international cooperation for emissions trading at the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety, where he's responsible for cooperation on emissions trading, capacity building, and linking. He's been involved in EU ETS, greenhouse gas mitigation projects, and other climate-related policies since 2004, and is an expert on legal aspects of emissions trading. We're thrilled to have him here today. And with that, Alexander, the floor is yours. I think you're unfortunately still on mute.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Anna. I will share my screen. Okay. Yes. First of all, also, my congratulations on the launch of this year's ETS status report. one can easily say that amongst the variety of important papers published by ICAP, it is one of the flagship publications. So I will speak today about current developments of the German emissions trading system. Also, it seems not to work properly. Can you see my screen still?
Unfortunately, we've just lost it.
Okay. Okay, I can't change the slides. So would you be able also to?
I think we can do that for you, absolutely. If you stop sharing, my colleague Jana will be able to ensure that everybody can see.
Now it's working, isn't it?
Perfect. Then
Yeah,
we'll let you
okay.
continue.
So let's start. So let's just have a look back. How did it start? So yeah, to be honest, in the past, so when we look back at the past decade, there was quite little support, quite little appetite for an additional carbon pricing system in Germany. However, things changed over the past 3 years, actually. In 2017, 2018, we got more and more aware that Germany would very likely miss the 2020 climate targets, and that we also from that may face substantial costs on the European level for avoiding non-compliance for missing targets that are legally binding set on the European level. So not just my ministry, which was aware of that fact, but also other ministries involved in Germany got aware that also there is not a price on each and every ton of CO2 in Germany. So we not demand an emissions trading system. There is a price on the European level. So for non-compliance, we might need to sell. To buy allocation, annual emission allocations from other member states. So there was quite obvious a price on CO2 emissions in Germany, and therefore it was rather easy as a next step to think about an additional emissions trading system. So it was clear that additional efforts will be needed to close the gap in 2020, and that we at least may have to ensure that we will meet our 2030 climate targets. And therefore, in autumn 2019, the Climate Action Program was adopted by the federal government. It is about a variety of measures, but one of the, let's say, the key measures proposed by that Climate Action Program was a new national emissions trading system on fuels that should be launched in 2021. And the focus of that system that was quite clear back in the days also already was to address emissions from the transportation sector, from road transport, and especially also from heating for buildings, as those both sectors were at least struggling the most actually to achieve their sectoral mitigation targets in Germany. However, when the idea of an additional emissions trading system in Germany was discussed, it was also quite clear that we have some challenges to overcome, some challenges to be addressed appropriately. So the avoidance in the end of, let's say, negative social impacts, negative impacts on the competitiveness of the industry that may also face that carbon price due to cost pass through. And of course, we have that specific situation that we have a the European emissions trading system in place and a double burden and additional CO2 price for sectors, for companies that are already covered by the emissions trading system on the European level, need to be avoided. So let's just to give a brief overview of about the system. So it is dealing, as I've mentioned, with CO2 emissions arising from the combustion of fuels. For the first 2 years of this emissions trading system, we apply a rather bit limited scope. So the main fuels are covered, and it is about 40% of the German national greenhouse gas emissions, approximately. So together with a European emissions trading system, that means that more than 80% of greenhouse gas emissions in Germany will be under a price. The cap still needs to be determined. However, it needs to be determined with our climate targets that arise in the end on the European effort sharing regulation. We will apply a flexible cap. That means there's no absolute emission threshold. I will speak about that later on. Sectors covered. In general, although the main focus might be the road transport and heating for buildings, in general, all sectors that are not covered by the European emissions trading system are now covered by this system, because it is about covering all emissions that could arise from the combustion of fuels. It is set up as an upstream emissions trading system. That means fuel distributors, suppliers have to report on the emissions that may arise through the reporting period from the combustion of the fuels they sold, they delivered to their customers. We will not apply any cost-free allocation. However, we will have a regulated price phase in the initial phase of this national emissions trading system. So from 2021 to 2025, there will be a fixed price. So allowances will be sold to a fixed price, which starts at 25 euro per ton CO2 in 2021, and then will gradually increase to 55 euro in 2025. 2026, we will start with the auctioning of allowances. However, there will be a price corridor applied in this first year of the auctioning phase, and we will decide whether from 2027 onwards, the price discovery, let's say, will be solely left to the market. Regarding compliance, we demand annual verified emission reports until 31st of July, and the surrender deadline is end of September. Regarding MOV, we will have a rather, let's say, soft start. So in 2021, 2022, only standard methods and standard factors will be applicable to get, let's say, the new companies that were not subject on emissions trading used to the new system, and give us also the opportunity to build up the administrative capacities. Let's speak about the challenges that we need to address, and sometimes we have already tried to address. So at first, the regulated allowance price in the initial phase. This was clearly a trade-off. So it was quite clear that we would not set the cap in the first year of that system already and leave the price discovery solely to the market. There were a lot of concerns about sincere fuel price hikes, and therefore it was decided to phase in the system stepwise and to raise the price from year to year. And as you can also see on this slide, this translates to rather moderate fuel price, to rather moderate impact on the fuel price. However, as a kind of companion policy, it was also decided that we want to reduce the electricity price hikes, the general electricity price hikes, due to our national promotion system for renewable energies. So there's a kind of a renewable energy levy that every person in Germany has to pay with its electricity bill, and we wanted to reduce the hike or the raising of this renewable energy levy. An additional commuter tax relief will be granted until 2025 for, let's say, commuters, long distance commuters, also to get used to the system and maybe to have the chance to look for alternatives. And finally, as a support measure, or actually a variety of supporting measures are foreseen in the Climate Action Program 2030, which is, for instance, of course, also the promotion of electric vehicles, of electric mobility. In terms of economic impacts, of course, also in the first place, the regulated price was the main, let's say, method to look for acceptance for within the companies. However, some of them, smaller companies, will also benefit from our measures to reduce the renewable energy levy. And currently under discussion is a compensation system to avoid carbon leakage, quite similar to the approaches under the European emissions trading system. We want to, of course, avoid that just emissions will not be reduced, but will just be, let's say, transferred out of Germany. And in the end, we will, of course, avoid or want to avoid any negative impacts on the competitiveness of our industries. However, if you look at the price, so Euro 2025 and 2021, I think the explicit danger of carbon leakage is rather low. Another compensation system is foreseen also to look for a broader acceptance of this system, compensation system to avoid hardships. So when we implement a new policy in Germany, we need to avoid that. Maybe companies need to stop running their businesses due to changed circumstances. They need time to adapt to new regulations, and therefore in the case that there are any companies that really would suffer from the cost price through of the allowance cost, they will be able to get a compensation. And finally,
Alex,
just the final slide.
Sorry. Okay, give you 30 seconds to do the slide, just so we can make sure to give everybody time to contribute. I know there's quite a few details.
And then there is this specific challenge. We have the European emissions trading system to be applied in Germany. So this is the leading system. This is set up by European law. But as our system, as an upstream system, covers potentially all fuels, there's kind of an overlap. And of course, what has to be avoided and was quite crucial also to get the system running was measures to avoid additional burden for companies, for operators that are already covered by the European emissions trading system. And there are two approaches that are available for the companies. The first one is a simple cooperation approach. So suppliers of fuels and operators could cooperate in a way that they provide evidence about the delivered fuel amounts and also about the usage of this fuels for purposes, for activities covered by the emissions trading system. And if they provide that evidence, then the fuel supplier may just deduct the respective emissions in its report. So this is an opportunity really to avoid a cost pass-through from the very beginning. If that is not applicable, then there's a compensation approach. So companies running an installation covered by the European emissions trading system can get a compensation for national allowance costs to be passed through. Although this is, of course, because it means still a negative impact on the liquidity of the companies, it is, let's say, only the second best solution. And that's it, actually, for the moment.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for the detail. I think I will skip asking you a question for now, just so we can ensure our other presenters, we get to hear from them. But I can already see from the chat there's quite a bit of interest in your presentation, so I'm sure we'll have many questions to discuss in the upcoming Q&A. So with that, I will turn over to Brittany White from Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is actually the newest ICAP member, and so we're thrilled to have Brittany with us here today. Brittany has been working on climate change and carbon pricing for the province of Nova Scotia for over 7 years. In her current role as a senior policy analyst at the Department of Environment and Climate Change, she supports the operation of the province's cap and trade program. She received her Master's of Environmental Studies from Dalhousie University, and she lives in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia on the beautiful east coast of Canada. She spends as much time outside as she can, and I can't blame her, being a fellow Canadian and knowing how gorgeous it is over there. Brittany, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. I was making the joke earlier that I had to close my blinds. There's too much sun coming in Nova Scotia, which is never a problem. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Nova Scotia's cap and trade program. Then I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID on our program. What are the current policy developments that are underway, as well as the role of our program in achieving net zero emissions. So first, I just want to give a little bit of background information on Nova Scotia itself. So our province is located on the east coast of Canada, and it's pretty close to the state of Maine in the United States. We've got a population of about 1 million people, and our economy is around 34 million a year US dollars. So just to put this in perspective, we're pretty small. All right, so next I'm briefly going to go over where our greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from. So our total emissions are just under 16 megatons as of 2018. Our largest source comes from the electricity sector with over 40%. Next up, we've got transportation and then heat that's generated for our buildings. Industries are on 8% and agriculture and waste together are 5%. Our sources of emissions have significantly shaped our action to date. So this means we've really focused on the electricity sector so far. All right, some really general information about our cap and trade program. So it's relatively new, as Emma mentioned. It launched in 2019, and it covers 80% of our emissions in the province. This includes facilities over 50,000 tons, fuel suppliers that place over 200 liters on the market, natural gas distributors that produce over 10,000 tons, and electricity importers generating over 10,000 tons. We currently have 27 registered entities, so we are officially I think the smallest after just after Switzerland. And finally, just a quick note, our program uses the same systems as the Western Climate Initiative. However, we are not linked at this time. All right, so we've talked a little bit about some background information. So I'm going to get into what the impact of COVID-19 was on our cap and trade program. So to start off, in 2020, we held our very first auction. So we were starting an entirely new world. Our first auction was held in June 2020, and we had a settlement price of $24 Canadian. It generated just over $15 million. And then we had our second auction in December 2020 with the settlement price of $24.70, which generated just over $13 million. These were both above our floor price. So our program and our team coped with COVID by not changing the events that we had originally scheduled because we wanted to ensure a sense of certainty for our participants. We also made sure that we communicated with our participants that we were going to go ahead with the events, even if we were going to be working from home. Just to note that one thing we did change was for our GHG emissions reporting, we waived the on-site verification requirements for 2019 and 2020, and this was to align with our public health orders. So finally, our program includes design features that help to ensure resilience, such as having a regulated floor price, which is outlined in our regs, having the ability to hold reserve sales between 2 and 4 times per year, and having a 4-year compliance period. All of this taken together helps provide certainty to our program participants to ensure that we had 2 successful auctions, and just so happened to be our very first auctions. So what policy developments are underway? Under the Sustainable Development Goals Act, which was passed in 2019 here, we announced 2 new GHG emission targets. The first is to reduce our emissions 53% below 2005 levels by 2030, and like a lot of others, to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We're also committed to developing a new climate change plan for clean growth, and that's going to be released later this year. So to achieve these targets, we're transitioning to cleaner electricity with a goal of 80% renewable by 2030, as well as phasing out coal by 2030. And if you think back to our greenhouse gas emission pie, we're still kind of focused on that section of our pie. We're also investing in programs for Nova Scotians using Green Fund revenue. So the Green Fund is our cap and trade program revenue. One example is that we're ensuring that homes are more comfortable for Nova Scotians by investing about $10 million into home warming and affordable multi-housing energy efficiency programs. Basically, the idea is to ensure that low-income Nova Scotians can have their homes more comfortable, and we're also trying to protect their family budgets. Another example is that Nova Scotia is providing rebates of $5,000 for new electric vehicles, $3,000 for used electric vehicles, and $500 for new e-bikes. And this is to shift how we move around the province to make it healthier and cleaner. We also are going to be continuing to run our cap and trade program, and we've announced 2 auctions this year. One will be in June, and the second is going to be in November. All right, so finally, I'd like to talk with you about the role of our cap and trade program in achieving net zero emissions in Nova Scotia. So first off, our program ensures that we have a hard cap on the amount of emissions in our province, creating a clear limit on our emissions. One of the most important aspects, though, of our program is the ability to make strategic investments that can help reduce our emissions to reach net zero by 2050 by using revenues from our Green Fund. We can also grow through the use of offsets, as well as the option to link with other cap and trade programs, both of which are included under our cap and trade program regulations. It's also important to note that cap and trade is not the only approach we're using to achieve net zero emissions in Nova Scotia, and nor should it be. We have a legislated target of net zero by 2050. We're increasing the use of renewable electricity and phasing out coal, both by 2030. We're also transitioning to cleaner transportation through the use of incentives. And we're looking at ways to retrofit existing buildings and make sure that new buildings are built in a way that's consistent with net zero. The biggest consideration for addressing emissions is that there's no one solution, and the cap and trade program is a part of it, but we need to approach it from a number of different angles in order to be successful. So that's it for me, Emma. So I'll pause there if you've got any questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brittany, and kudos on doing your first auction during a worldwide pandemic. No small feat.
Thank you.
I'd actually like to pick up on that a little bit, and I'm wondering if you could go into a bit more detail about how exactly those design features really supported your system's resiliency. You spoke about the transparency, but perhaps you can go a bit more into detail, because that's one of really the key themes in the status report this year that we're trying to dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things for us was that we had a legislative floor price. So going in, you know, it was going to be at least $20 Canadian a ton, but seeing that it was actually settled above the floor price was really fantastic. And I think that indicated that we do have like a robust market. And I think to getting into a little bit more on the design features, having a 4-year compliance period as well, because it helps participants kind of like understand over time how they can actually plan for any sort of changes and fluctuations in the market. But in all honesty, I think given the fact that it was our first auction, really having clear communication with our participants was the biggest thing. Like the design features were absolutely critical, so we could talk to them about, you know, what that meant. At working from home, we all have dogs and pets and kids. So if you have barking dog on your working from home bingo card, you can scratch it off. So I really think like clear communication, it was the most important thing for us. And I think the other design feature for us to kind of keep in mind is that our compliance period goes out until 2022. So we're going to be looking at other options after that as well. But really, the biggest takeaway for us was being crystal clear and talking with our participants ahead of time.
Okay, thanks so much for that. And I'm sure we'll pick up more there in the Q&A. All right, I'll now move us down to South America with Herman from Colombia. Herman is an advisor to the Technical Vice Ministry of the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit and is a consultant to the IDB. He has more than 8 years of experience in the economics of climate change and has published several articles on the subject. He has a master's degree in economics from the Universidad de los Andes, where he has also been a professor on economic topics. Herman, we're thrilled to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to stay here in this report to 2021. And it's be happy to show and see what different experience, and in particular, the Colombian experience that we are under consideration. But and I want to show you more a little bit about the context and what is that our steps that they developed. So the first step is currently Colombia made an increase the ambition in the reduction emission to the Paris Agreement. The last NDC, we want to reduce close to 20% of our emission, and right now we are close to the 51% of our emission to 2030. And it means that we have to increase more our ambition, not only in the actions as well in the instruments that we have in mind. And that's why it is recognized how we are as a government send a different signals to go forward to reduce emission, and to be clear that in 2050 we want to be a carbon neutrality. So we need to increase right now. So this increase is as well happened at the same time with the crisis of the coronavirus, and has a different strategies, you know, and implies a little bit changes that we have in mind at this moment, because we want to include actions that has to be answers in the short terms, but as well in the long term. So this is a general idea of what we want to do in the recovery plans, and how our recovery plans include strategies related to climate change topics, energy transitions, and something about the Clean Growth Law, and how we can do aspect to go forward and send the incentive to move forward. So this is a general idea about what you have in mind. So at the end, we have instruments to plan and design our ETS program that we are working at least by 3 years ago. So the first one is, as mentioned before, the NDC update. The second one is the climate change law that give us the order, in fact, to develop the ETS program in the next years. And we have a good experience with the voluntary markets. But right now, in the last year, we finished a program with the PMR that allow us to give a roadmap and give us a lot of information about what is the next steps and how we can develop our strategies. So one of the things that I want to topic is, and I want to recognize, is how the voluntary markets that work in Colombia with the carbon tax is the great examples to now, and it give us information to this the correct way, the certainty way. So the first one is we are making a trade-off mechanisms in the carbon tax and use the voluntary markets in this trade-off and allow the private invest in reduction emissions certifications. And I want to show you something about the impact, and it is really interesting. How if we how the carbon tax is the left graph, how reduction emission less than 1 million of tons per year, but how the offset mechanism have better results, and has not better not only because the emissions that we are a forest country, because as well the market as a complaint goes the right incentive, and it is something that we are discussing with all the time with the strategy of communication and how we can use this trust and this good communication to use the experience of the voluntary market. So currently we are working to use this aspect to increase our ambition and goes forward and move forward for the ETS. So at the end, we are making the environmental of trust, an environment of be sure that these mechanisms doesn't affect or increase the crisis, the economic crisis, but as well we want to recovery doesn't increase the environmental crisis or the social crisis. So at the end, this mechanism like a ETS, we need to be go forward in this. So just as I mentioned a little bit, we are underdeveloped ETS, but doesn't mean that we have to right now develop a knowledge and trust, and that's why the ICAP moment is key, because give us and increase more the knowledge and the trust about the ETS program. The experience of the other countries is key for us and give us more details about what is happens. And the second one is use the huge information that give us the voluntary markets with our carbon tax, and how we can use this one to increase the corporative reports. And it is something that we need to move forward. So at the end, we have a little bit, we have in a moment when we are in the point we are changing and increase the move for the ETS, but as well we needed to be sure about our communication and what will happen internally in Colombia, because the crisis, as mentioned before, we want to increase the crisis economics as well, the social crisis and the environmental crisis. So we need people believe that the ETS is a good instrument to try to move forward for the different strategies. So this is what I have in the Colombian experience and how we can move forward for the ETS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Really appreciate the presentation. One question to follow up here. What are some of the really key next steps in developing that ETS infrastructure in Colombia? Can you give us some specific steps that you're focused on at the moment?
Yeah, we have an advantage. The law made made the ETS program. So right now we are currently develop the regulation in terms of information and define clearly what the sectors could be included in this ETS. So these are the next step that happened this year, but as well, we need to be more people to understand what happened in ETS. So they increase the capacity and knowledge. This is something that we are working this year, because not only the government want to talk about the ETS, we need the social talk about that, and it give us the movement to move forward to regulation.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, now we've reached the point in our discussion where we'll do a Q&A, and we see that there's been quite a bit of activity in the Q&A area. So please keep firing your questions. We will do our best to answer as many as possible. I think I would give the first question to Alexander, because he didn't get to answer one previously. Alexander, we have a question from Eduardo Picara from Mexico too. He's wondering, what are the covered entities in the German ETS, and what are the specific points that they are regulated at?
So yes, the national system is an upstream emissions trading system, which means that the fuel distributors are the compliance entities. So not, let's say, the installation, the electricity producer, or the industrial installation that really uses the fuel and emits CO2, but the fuel distributor, let's say in the supply chain, the first one who, let's say, injects the fuel into the market in Germany is the compliance entity, and has to report on the amounts of fuels delivered, and the potential CO2 emissions that may arise from the combustion of this fuel.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. We'll take a question now to Julia. We've got a question from Johannes Lauber, and he's curious if you could shed some light on the operational activities in Northern Ireland in light of the UK having departed from the EU ETS. So how is basically the protocol in Northern Ireland, how that's been sort of figured out amidst all this?
Yes, I think I tried to respond directly to Johannes already with some background information. Essentially, where the protocol applies is on the Isle of Ireland, that of course hosts two countries, Ireland and Northern Ireland. And as such, the installations in the power sector and industry that in the Northern Ireland are still covered by the EU ETS due to their physical connection with those in Ireland. So in that respect, the EU ETS still partly applies to at least a fraction of installations in the UK.
Okay, thank you. I think now I'll go to Brittany. We've got a question also from Eduardo. Unfortunately, had to leave, but I think it's a very relevant question. He's wondering if you could speak to a little bit about any future plans for potentially linking with other systems, perhaps California or Quebec, given that you mentioned that the design features are very similar with the WCI states and provinces.
It's a great question, and it's one that logically we get quite often. So we do have the ability to link with other jurisdictions in our cap and trade regulations. So we thought about that kind of in the early days when we were actually designing it, to think, what's next, to build in some flexibility, given that we are quite a small jurisdiction. So under our regulations, we have the ability to do that. We are currently a WCI participating jurisdiction, which means we sit on their board. We work very closely with Quebec and California. They supported us a lot to get our cap and trade program up and running. And we also use all the same systems that they do. However, right now we do not trade allowances between the jurisdictions. Looking ahead, I think our system is quite small, and it's a serious consideration for us to think about, would we potentially link with Quebec and California? They'd likely be natural partners. So we haven't had any sort of actions on that, But I think that we have the possibility on the table, and we've got the established relationships, and our programs are closely aligned. So it's a serious consideration for us, especially looking ahead with, to your point earlier, Emma, the question that you'd asked me about, design considerations and creating resilience. Our one of the biggest challenges with our system is liquidity, given that we've got under 30 participants. So a design feature to link is a important component. So short answer, we are not linked, but longer answer is that it's a possibility.
Okay, another moment for watch this space, and interested to see how this progresses. Thanks, Brittany. Germán, I'd like to come to you. One of the things that you highlighted in your presentation was Colombia having this goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And I'm curious how the ETS contributes to achieving that goal. What role does it play in that plan?
We know that we need to use the ETS as a strategy. So currently, the studies that we have is without this kind of mechanisms, it is not possible to do this goal. So at the end, this is the way when we want to move forward and goes to have a key role in the NDC and the carbon neutrality. So at the end, the short answer is yes, it's a key role. The long answer is we need to be sure that it happens, believe and create a trust mechanisms to do that.
Okay. Thank you. I think now I'd like to open up a question generally to the panel, and please raise your hands to say who'd like to go first. Question on carbon leakage, specifically the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. We've got a question asking how linked systems specifically may be impacted by any kind of cross-border levy and sort of the thinking behind this. Would anyone like to sort of jump on this discussion with sort of how this is being looked at from their respective jurisdictions' position? I can see we've got some European jurisdictions smiling, so. Any takers?
So
Alex,
Julia, if you don't want to,
No, sorry, my computer was taking a bit longer to unmute, almost maybe giving me a sign that I shouldn't say too much on this topic. I think ultimately the proposal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism will be underway also with the June legislative package, and there I think that the Commission services are taking a very, very close look at the existing measures to protect stakeholders and industries against the risk of carbon leakage, as well as the possible alternatives in a very prudent way. What we are working towards is ensuring adequate protection without penalizing those who have already taken effort to decarbonize and improve the efficiencies of their processes. So there I think we are looking in a very, very prudent way on how a measure like this would be implemented, the effects it would have had, and most importantly, its effectiveness. But Alex, if you have anything to add from the German perspective, go ahead.
So no, I'm completely confident that the Commission is dealing with this actually quite sensitive issue in the moment. So the CBAM is always the elephant in the room when we are speaking about carbon pricing these days. So just with regard to the question, so I think linking could be one of the let's say easiest ways to avoid being subject to border adjustment mechanisms, because let's say in a full linked system, you will more and more get to, let's say, at least quite similar prices over time, so the carbon constraints would be quite comparable, and therefore this could be an easy way to avoid any carbon border adjustment mechanisms. However, I think it is also quite crucial to explain why we are thinking about that. So it's quite clear under the let's say, raised ambition of the European NDC, we need also a further raised ambition within our emissions trading system. And this means that not just the, let's say, electricity sector needs to contribute more, or more or less maybe needs to more or less be decarbonized by the end of this decade. Also the industry needs to contribute more, and that means that we may need to reduce further the cost-free allocation, and therefore kind of an other instrument to, let's say, to ensure the competitiveness of the European industry is of course also needed. So it's as Julia mentioned, it is not a mechanism to be understood as a kind of a penalty for others. It is just also a mechanism just to make sure that we still carry on to be an industrialized continent.
Thank you both for your input there. I'd like to broaden the discussion there to Brittany and Hemant, because this is a topic that affects everybody worldwide. From your respective ETSs, perhaps Brittany, we can start with you. How are you starting to think about these issues of carbon leakage, especially given that some jurisdictions might be a little further down the road in discussions with it? What does that bring up for Nova Scotia?
It's an interesting conversation in Canada, I think, because we're looking at a mix of, we've got the subnational and the national carbon pricing systems in place. So I think that it's going to require a lot of conversations between the provinces and the territories and the federal government to see how it's going to apply, kind of specifically just looking at Canada itself to start, but then also as conversations ramp up, you know, extending beyond, and just kind of keeping in mind that Quebec and California have a linked system as well, and kind of how that's going to interact in it. So I think for us, it's going to be, we are starting to look into it and explore what it means. And I think that we're keeping a close eye on it. It was also mentioned in one of the federal government's documents that was released in December, kind of an area to start exploring within the Canadian context. So I think it's still early days for us. But as you mentioned, Emma, I think it's definitely something that we're going to need to keep an eye on. It's just as programs start expanding and new programs start popping up around the world. And Alexander, to your point, like kind of like the dynamic, how it interacts with linking as well. So early days and kind of keeping an eye on it.
Yeah. Okay. Hemant, how about for you? Especially for a system that's still in its development phases, how do you consider this question?
We are under development thinking about the accountability could be joined with the other mechanisms, and it is something that we haven't, and it is good to think about that previously to develop, because give us a good links to how to increase. But the other things is try to talk with the other countries, as Mexico, Chile, Brazil, and the other that we are close regions, and how we can move forward faster and go for the increase the ETS in the region. It could be help for us to link with the others, and as well to avoid the leakage, because the competitivity in our country is needed that with the others. So if as a block we are move forward in this kind of mechanisms, is better. So this is the two strategies, international strategies, that we are going to do that.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd like to go with another question that's cross-panel. So again, please raise your hand if you'd like to be the first one to take this one up. You've all highlighted that emissions trading is a key tool on the road to net zero, but it's not the only tool. And we have a question asking sort of what are the other companion policies, that can buffer the emissions trading systems in order to ensure that that goal of carbon neutrality by mid-century is achieved?
Sure, I can start since I hinted at a little bit in the presentation, but Nova Scotia is in a bit of a unique position. The development of our program was in reaction to the federal government in Canada's requirement to have a carbon pricing system. So when we developed our cap and trade system, it was really as a reaction. And so we had a number of other programs that were already in place. And then in 2019, when we announced our new 2 GHG targets, particularly looking at net zero, we really think that you need a suite of different options in order to hit net zero. ETS alone will not get us there, and we need to think about particularly kind of the last little bits if your coverage doesn't extend. Like, so for example, in Nova Scotia, agriculture and waste are outside the scope of our ETS. So, how do we get at those sectors, for example? So I think for us, it includes renewable electricity targets. It includes phasing out fossil fuels. So for us, we're phasing out coal by 2030. And then it includes kind of shifting to the other major sectors for us, really having a serious look at, what it means for transportation and what it means for buildings as well. Here in Nova Scotia, a lot of homes are still heated with oil. So that's something that we need to get off of, and it's part of our complete kind of like looking at electrification more broadly. So ETS is important, and I think having a carbon price is a great step, but I really think that you need to broaden and look at the other policies and how they interact with each other too. So it's not just making sure you cover everything, but you cover everything in a way that makes sense, because you don't want to layer on certain areas if that's not actually really the most efficient and effective way to get your reductions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Brittany. Alex, maybe I can, or Yulia, you've unmuted yourself, so please feel free to jump in.
No, I think I can largely echo the approach of Nova Scotia in that regard. I think we have also sort of in line with the EU ETS, we have also renewable energy targets, energy efficiency targets for member states. We have directives in both those areas to encourage the development and investment in these areas. We have the Eco Design Directive, emission standards for vehicles. One additional consideration is that not only do you need complementary policies, but you also need to ensure that they provide a coherent signal for reducing emissions, for the consumers and then the producers to changing to lower carbon alternatives, and to really foster this systemic change. Equally, something that has been put on the at the core of EU's increased climate ambition is mitigating the adverse impacts of the cost of that transition. So in our case, this is just transition and the just transition mechanism to assist those areas that would struggle the most with departing from solid fossil fuels and revitalizing their local economies in doing exactly in helping them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's super important if you're going to impose a cost in one place, thinking about the effects across the society. Absolutely. Alex, maybe you'd like to augment on this question, especially because I can imagine in establishing a parallel emissions trading system to the EU ETS, this is one that you really had to consider.
Yeah, just in terms of our national fuel emissions trading system. So when we speak about fuel prices, so you've seen the rather moderate price levels in Germany, at least in the initial phase, so up to around 50, 60 euros. So we won't see so much, let's say, impact really, so much behavioral changes that are needed for let's say decarbonizing more or less the road transport sector as well. So prices would be required to be, let's say, 4 times higher actually to really have an impact on the sector in Germany. However, we will not succeed with just emissions trading and high fuel prices if we can't offer alternatives. So let's say the charging infrastructure needs to be built, electromobility needs to be promoted. If we don't provide for alternatives also for commuters and the public transport and so on, I think we will not be successful just with high emissions trading allowance price.
Herman, please, if you'd like to augment and speak about your approach.
Yeah, I want to say something that is related about our emissions. We are half of our emission is related to a follow, and it is something that the ETS in general has not covered. But we understand that the other sector needs it. As mentioned, Britain, one instrument to one goal. And we think that in the other sector, that energy and transports needed this kind of mechanisms, but as well in the other, as fall sectors or change of lands, we need the new mechanisms and think how to connect it, offset mechanisms and show in representation, and another side to help to move forward of that on these directions. And it is something that how not necessarily regulated sectors could be good results with these mechanisms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to the end of our webinar, and there's quite a few more questions in here that we haven't had the chance to answer. What I will say is that some of them are very much addressed in the ICAP status report. So please do go read the report to get the answer to some of those questions. And some of the questions and pieces of the discussion that we've had today here are also addressed in a number of former and upcoming ICAP publications. So I'd love to turn it over to Will to give a little bit of an intro to some of these, to know where folks can find additional resources to dive further into these topics.
Thanks, Emma. So also many thanks to the panelists and all the participants. It was a really interesting discussion, and no doubt the first of many for this year, and to look forward to to hosting these sorts of events with ICAP. But now that we have published the ICAP status report, we will be turning our attention to the launch of the revamped emissions trading system handbook that we've done together with the Partnership for Market Readiness. So this is something that we will be, that we're excited to launch in April. And we've basically taken a look at the document to update it to reflect developments that have taken place across the globe since we first published the handbook in 2016. And also just sort of taking on board the experience of jurisdictions that have used the handbook in the development of their own systems, added a few different sections and bits and bobs here and there. So we're really excited to launch this next month together with the PMR. And another paper that we've been working on, where there's some interest in the questions as well, is what role an emissions trading system can have in basically stimulating the removals market, and whether and what sort of design considerations might need to come up in a sort of the medium to long term to make emission trading systems ready for removals if they decide to go down that way. So yeah, shameless plug there for those two resources, but stay tuned for that coming out of ICAP.
Thanks so much, Will. And looking forward to being able to make those available for all of you. I think we're coming towards the end, as I said, so I'd like to finalize with asking each of the panelists what a key takeaway for them was this year. It's an unprecedented time, having to navigate maintaining, developing, improving your systems while navigating a global pandemic and economic recession. So I'd be curious, we have a nice variety of different kinds of systems here. What was a key takeaway and learning for your system over the course of the past year for both short-term resilience and long-term climate goals? And I think I'm gonna start with Hemant for this one, please.
Thank you. And I think one of the lessons that we have in this crisis is even when the GDP of all the country was declining, our emissions is not declining for sustainable time. So it is show how the economy move forward for these emissions, but as well we needed more ambitious in terms of price of on change of minds, of change of something, and learn about what happened in the world. It is the good way to do that. So that's why I think that this kind of ICAP reports is so useful. And this happens as well in these current crazy times when we need to see what happened in the world, because all the world is learning about that. So I think it's how to connect these two things, and I think it's but that's the way that I feel these reports could be so useful for the countries.
Thanks so much, Armando. I'm glad it can be useful. I'll go next to Julia, please.
Right. So if I can, I will mention 3 takeaways. So something that you have already alluded to, Emma, specifically short-term stability and long-term perspective. I think that was key for the EU ETS to behave the way it has had in view of the pandemic. It really showed. I suppose I doubt the legislators at the time of setting up all those measures to strengthen the system envisaged the scale of the external shock that we've experienced with the onset of the pandemic. But it has proven to work, and it has proven to give confidence to stakeholders that it will continue to work, and that it is a structure worth developing. Second, this long-term perspective, commitment to climate action and to delivering it consistently and progressively. But one final thing, a takeaway that is probably more horizontal and goes beyond just the emissions trading system is the communication and transparency in governing climate policy, and the communication of information in a transparent way that is accessible to citizens, so that they understand the way these policies work, the way these policies are intended to work in their favor rather than against them, has probably been made really evident by the pandemic and all the discussions we have had around it. So just an ETS specific takeaway and a more broad one.
Absolutely, it's a message we've heard loud and clear today. So good to hear it again from the EU perspective. Brittany, how about for you? First auction in a pandemic. Key takeaways from all this.
No, it's crazy, right? No, I think the biggest key takeaway for me is really thinking about it as a system. If while we're, revenue is coming in that we're being able to use to have a transition. So something that Julia said, we're at a key moment right now, and we have a really important opportunity to kind of change the direction of how our economies work and where we are putting our investments. So when we can think about the revenue that's coming in, I think that we can use that in a really strategic way, in a way to kind of respond coming back from the pandemic, to think really critically about where we're putting that. So I really see it like the biggest key takeaway is to kind of use this moment to think about where we want to go next.
Okay, opportunities arise. Alex, you will round us out, please. Key takeaway from the last year.
So yeah, first of all, I would like to endorse everything that Julia said on the European emissions trading system. However, on the national German emissions trading system, 1 year ago, I was rather skeptic whether we will really be able to launch our national system in 2021. So I was expecting much more opposition, much more, let's say, also the government getting under pressure from the industry to postpone the launch of the national emissions trading system. But there have been some attempts on that, but there were no, let's say, really strong opposition on the launch of the system as it was scheduled. So I was in a certain way quite surprised, but also quite relieved that climate policy seems to play a key role also for decision makers in companies, and that it was acceptable to start with this system also under these rather difficult circumstances.
I think that's a very encouraging message for us to end our conversation with today. This is possible under these difficult circumstances, and it's important. So I want to give a very warm thank you to all our panelists today for taking the time to speak with us. Thanks to all of you for joining us from around the world. And please do take a look at the ICAP Status Report 2021. It's on our website. And we're looking forward to engaging with you for future publications and presentations. With that, we will close the webinar. All the best from the Secretariat.